At 11:12 p.m., an emergency operator picked up a call. There was no screaming, just a whisper of 3 words. He's in the house. When officers arrived at the address of Neha Chauhan, a 24-year-old bank employee, they expected to find a typical break-in. They found her front door standing wide open. But inside, the apartment was still. Nothing had been overturned, and no locks had been forced. The only movement in the flat was in the kitchen, where a pot of tea was violently boiling on a lit gas stove. The tea suggested she was right in the middle of her evening routine, but Neha was gone, and her mobile phone, the device she would have used to call for help, was sitting untouched on her bed. A pot doesn't boil itself, and people don't typically walk out of their front doors mid-meal without their phones. The apartment was a collection of signs that she was there, and proof that she wasn't. To find where the sequence of events broke, investigators turned to the building's digital security logs. The cameras provided a clear starting point. At 10:58 p.m., Neha is seen stepping into the ground floor elevator, heading up to her apartment. But 7 minutes later, at 11:05, the elevator log shows the car moving back up to her floor. Only this time, the internal camera shows the lift is completely empty. This left the police with a physical gap. Either Neha stepped off on a different floor into a camera blind spot, or she was intercepted in that 7-minute window. But the tea on the stove complicates both theories. If she was intercepted in the hall or on another floor, she never would have reached her kitchen to turn on the gas. To solve the physical movement of the victim, the investigation shifted back to the digital origin of the 11:12 p.m. call. Since Neha's mobile phone was already in police custody at the time of the call, it couldn't have been the source of the whisper. Police requested a forensic trace on the signal to determine the exact coordinates of the device that dialed emergency services. The trace confirmed the signal transmitted from within the unit itself, but it didn't come from a cellular tower. The metadata showed the call traveled through the building's copper wiring, originating from an analog jack in the storeroom. This is where the physics of the building fail. Telecom records showed that this specific landline had been disconnected for 2 years. There was no active service, yet a call had been placed. Investigators began a physical sweep of the walls, tracing the dead copper wire from the storeroom jack to see where it led. The wire didn't run to the building's main terminal. It disappeared into the drywall directly behind a heavy wooden cupboard. When they pulled the cupboard away from the wall, they found the back panel had been cut out, revealing a jagged opening in the drywall that had been masked by the furniture. Behind the wall was a narrow, finished crawl space, a hidden room built into the hollow architecture between the apartment units. Inside that dark space, they found the source of the struggle. Deep, frantic scratch marks were gouged into the wood and plaster from the inside. And next to those marks, a final sentence was carved into the concrete, explaining why the phone line had suddenly come to life. He is still here. This is the reality of frogging, where the person living in your home isn't a guest, but someone living in the shadows of the floor plan. We assume our walls are solid and our doors are the only way in. But sometimes the threat isn't trying to get inside. It's already there, waiting for the tea to boil.